Tonight, we drift back to a quiet corner of New York State, to the soft hush of small towns nestled between gentle hills and winding rivers where life once moved in a slow, familiar rhythm. The kind of towns where doors were left unlocked and neighbors knew one another by name, where the seasons marked time and childhood felt like it might last forever. But even the most peaceful places sometimes carry shadows. Shadows that slip in quietly, unnoticed at first. And in the early 1970s, three small towns, each with their own charm, their own rhythm, would become linked by a series of tragedies so unusual, so oddly patterned, that to this day, no one truly knows who to blame or why it began. This is the story of the Alphabet Murders, the puzzling, sorrowful disappearances and deaths of three young girls, each with matching first and last initials, each found in a town that shared those same letters. It is a case that would haunt the region for decades, a quiet riddle carved into the daily fabric of life, impossible to forget. As you settle in, let the noise of the day drift softly into the background. Close your eyes, if you'd like. Breathe in gently, and imagine yourself in another time, where the hum of fluorescent lights in a school hallway, the flicker of a street lamp at dusk, the echo of footsteps on cold pavement, all might carry stories we've never quite understood. Let's begin where all good stories of place begin, with daily life, what it was like in the shadowed calm of 1970s upstate New York before the first girl went missing. The early 1970s in western New York had a particular stillness to it. This was the region stretching out from Rochester, past tidy grid-plan neighborhoods and small towns stitched into rolling farmland and quiet stretches of woods. The air here always seemed a little damp in spring, a little brittle in winter. The skies were often a pale grey, the sun filtered like light behind cotton. Children walked to school, their breath fogging in the morning air. School buses rumbled softly down sloping roads, the sound of lunchboxes clicking open, pencils tapping against desks, and teachers' voices echoing in long hallways became the quiet soundtrack of 1,000 ordinary days. There were no cell phones then, no constant hum of connection. When someone called your name from down the block, you heard it, sharp and real, as it bounced off chain-link fences and faded siding. Mail arrived in metal boxes with little red flags. News came from radios or the grainy print of newspapers folded neatly on breakfast tables. In places like Rochester, Churchville, and Webster, families were tightly knit, often rooted in the same town for generations. Grandparents lived just a few streets over. Children played flashlight tag under sodium orange streetlights, rode bikes along frozen canals in winter, and gathered outside corner stores where a few coins could still buy candy. These towns weren't grand or bustling. They were comfortable, sleepy, shaped by industry and softened by time. Many fathers worked factory jobs in food processing, auto parts, or Kodak, which dominated Rochester's skyline. Mothers might have worked part-time or stayed home, running errands, organizing bake sales, helping with homework. On Sundays, churches filled, pews lined with wool coats and tired smiles. On school days, the lunchroom smelled of ham sandwiches and milk cartons. And after dinner, children might have curled up on shag carpets, watching black and white reruns as snow began to patter softly against the windows. Yet for all its ordinariness, there was a kind of quiet loneliness to the landscape too. Fields that stretched too far, neighborhoods separated by long wooded roads, and moments where time seemed to pause, where you could be alone, utterly, for a moment too long. And it was in these kinds of spaces, between the daily rituals, between comfort and the unknown, that the first thread began to unravel. Before the case had a name, before investigators drew connections, before headlines spoke of patterns and predators and tragedy, there were just families, children, mornings that began like any other, and small, nearly invisible moments when someone, stepped out of the shadows. Let us linger just a little longer here, in the stillness of the ordinary. In the town of Churchville, west of Rochester, a little girl named Carmen would walk to the corner store with coins in her pocket. In Webster, a girl named Wanda rode the bus home with her school books tucked neatly under one arm. And in Rochester, a young girl named Michelle would sometimes disappear into her imagination, drawing quietly at the table while the television murmured in the background. Their names were not yet connected, their paths had not yet crossed, but the world around them was already changing, ever so slightly. A door left ajar, a car idling too long at the corner, a figure standing just a little too still on the far side of the street. The wind would blow, cold and unremarkable, the lights would flicker, and life, somehow, would carry on. In a world so often shaped by headlines and flashing lights, it's easy to forget the stillness that came before. The warmth of a kitchen, the hush of a bedtime routine, a mother brushing her daughter's hair, a father zipping up a winter coat. Each of the girls in this story lived lives full of these small, tender moments. They were not symbols, they were not initials, they were children, with favorite songs and favorite sweaters, with quirks and giggles and dreams that flickered quietly beneath the surface. And so tonight, we begin not with what was done to them, but with who they were. Carmen Colon. Churchville, New York, November 1971. Imagine a crisp autumn afternoon. The leaves have just begun to fall, carpeting the sidewalks in soft reds and yellows. The sun is setting early now, painting long shadows across the pavement. In the town of Churchville, the air smells faintly of wood smoke and distant fields. Carmen Colon was 10 years old, a small girl with a serious face and eyes that seemed always to be watching, curious, attentive, maybe even a little older than her years. She lived with her grandparents and an aunt. Her home life was complicated. Her parents were separated, and Carmen had bounced between households, a child tugged gently between grown-up lives. Despite the instability, Carmen had a presence. Neighbors described her as bright, not in the academic sense necessarily, but in the way she lit up a space. She liked to help her aunt with chores, liked to walk places on her own, independent, sometimes stubborn, a little shadow flitting from the corner store to the apartment and back again. She would often go to the pharmacy to pick up prescriptions for her family, a responsibility that seemed just a little too big for her small frame. But this was 1971, and even the smallest children were expected to grow up quickly sometimes. On the day she disappeared, Carmen was sent to the local pharmacy to pick up medication. She left the apartment alone, wearing a red coat. Witnesses say she seemed flustered or upset when she arrived. She left the store before receiving the medicine, and what happened next is unclear, except that she never returned. But let's not move there yet. Let's stay for a moment in the world that Carmen knew, where the corners of streets held familiar sounds, where the creak behind the house whispered under the weight of fallen leaves, where she might have paused to look at something in the window of the store, a doll, maybe, or a row of magazines, or simply her own reflection in the glass, where she was still just a girl, walking quickly through town, thinking thoughts no one else would ever hear. Wanda Walkowicz. Rochester, New York, April 1973. It was a Wednesday, a cool, grey spring day in Rochester. Rain had misted the sidewalks earlier in the morning, leaving everything a little slick, a little cold. On Conkey Avenue, in a working-class neighborhood filled with two-story homes and narrow yards, Wanda Walkowicz was finishing her day. Wanda was 11, a sweet, quiet girl who loved her pet cats, loved school, and often helped take care of her younger siblings. Her family wasn't wealthy, life wasn't always easy, but she carried herself with quiet purpose, responsible, polite, kind. She had a routine. She would walk home from school, sometimes stopping at the corner store to pick up groceries. On the day she vanished, she had done just that, gone to the store for her mother, carrying home a bag that was just slightly too big for her thin arms. Wanda wore a red and white striped dress that day. She was seen walking, carefully balancing her items, heading toward home, but she never arrived. And yet, before that moment, before the headlines, Before the search, Wanda was simply a girl moving through the world with grace. She liked to draw. She liked to read. Her room, small and simple, held all the things a child would treasure. Stickers, paperback books, the crumpled edges of a well-loved coloring sheet. She had just turned 11 weeks before. A cake had been made. A wish had been whispered over flickering candles. We don't know what she wished for, but it's comforting to imagine, perhaps, that it was something small and sweet, something like a toy or a sunny day, or her mother's smile at breakfast. Michelle Menzer. Webster, New York, November 1973. Michelle was the youngest, just 10 years old when she disappeared. A girl with light brown hair, often pulled back into a ponytail. A little shy, maybe, a little sensitive, but full of warmth and love for her family. Her world was a small one. School, home, church. Michelle had been raised in a household that taught politeness, obedience, and kindness. She loved playing outside when the weather was good, and was known for being sweet to her classmates, even if she wasn't the loudest in the room. On the day she vanished, Michelle had asked for a ride home from school, something she didn't usually do. No one knew exactly why. The walk wasn't far, but the air was cold, and perhaps she just felt uneasy. When the ride didn't come, she began walking anyway. She was last seen near a busy intersection, standing alone, small against the backdrop of traffic and early dusk. Michelle's disappearance felt somehow more fragile, more sudden, as if the world had blinked, and she was gone. But before that moment, before the silence, Michelle was just a child, drawing little hearts in the margins of her notebook, waiting patiently for lunch to be served, laughing, maybe, at a joke no one else quite heard. She was real and soft and entirely undeserving of the fate that would find her. 3 girls: Carmen, Wanda, Michelle. Their names reduced in headlines to eerie patterns: CCWWMM. But they were never just initials. They were voices, footsteps, songs hummed under the breath. They were mornings and mittens and milk cartons. They were lives, and something, someone, intersected those lives with such precision, such haunting similarity, that the world would never quite understand it. In the next part of our story, we'll gently explore what was discovered, the crimes themselves, not in detail, but in pattern, in atmosphere, in the strange, eerie puzzle left behind. For now, take another breath, and if you're still awake, we'll continue shortly. There was something strange about the names. At first, no one noticed it. After all, months had passed between the deaths. Different towns, different days. 3 young girls gone, each tragedy mourned in its own community. It wasn't until the 3rd case, until Michelle Mayenzer's body was discovered, that someone looked closely and saw the thread. Carmen Colon, Wanda Walkowicz, Michelle Mayenza. Each girl shared matching initials, CCWWMM, and each was found in a town with the same first letter. Carmen in Churchville, Wanda in Webster, Michelle in Macedon. 3 girls, 3 matching sets, 1 haunting pattern. It was the kind of coincidence that didn't feel like coincidence at all. And suddenly, a new term was whispered across headlines and into living rooms: the alphabet killer. The early investigation. When Carmen Colon disappeared in 1971, police had acted quickly. Witnesses claimed to have seen her running, barefoot, terrified, along Interstate 490. A truck driver later recalled a small figure darting into traffic, hands raised, as if begging someone to stop. No one did. Her body was found 2 days later, 12 miles from home. She had been left near a remote spot off the highway, exposed to the cold. The community grieved, but the case went cold. It wasn't until Wanda Walkowicz was found, 2 years later, that police began to see the shape of something darker. Like Carmen, Wanda had been abducted in broad daylight. Her body was discovered off a rural road. Like Carmen, she had been redressed, post-mortem. a detail that suggested a careful, deliberate hand. Then came Michelle, and suddenly the theory wasn't quiet anymore. The alphabet pattern. Detectives from multiple jurisdictions began comparing notes. A task force was assembled. Psychologists and profilers were brought in. The pattern was chilling in its simplicity. Each victim's first and last names began with the same letter. Each was found in a town starting with that same letter. All three were young girls, aged 10 or 11. All had been abducted in daylight, in or near Rochester, New York. All were manually strangled, a method requiring close contact. Each was redressed after death, not randomly, but with eerie neatness. Two of the three were menstruating at the time of death, a deeply specific, disturbing detail that led some to suspect the killer had knowledge of their bodies. The media seized on the pattern. Alphabet killer made headlines nationwide. Theories bloomed. Fear spread. But while the public focused on initials and geography, police struggled with something more practical: evidence. There was very little. No fingerprints, no fibers, no DNA, as it wouldn't be developed for decades. What they had was sightings, rumors, and the outlines of a ghost. Persons of interest. Over the years, several suspects emerged. One was Miguel Colon, Carmen's uncle. He had fled to Puerto Rico shortly after her death, fueling suspicions. Carmen had lived with his family at the time, but there was never enough evidence to charge him, and in 1991, Miguel died by suicide, taking whatever truths he carried with him. Another suspect was Kenneth Bianchi, later known as one half of the Hillside Stranglers in Los Angeles. He had lived in Rochester during the time of the Alphabet murders, but his connection was weak. His known victims were adults, and his timeline didn't quite match. The third, and perhaps most discussed, was Dennis Termini, a local fireman and security guard with a troubling history. Termini had been accused of a series of violent rapes around Rochester. When police finally cornered him in 1974, he took his own life before they could question him. Termini drove a car matching witness descriptions. He lived near Wanda's route home, but again, no physical evidence ever tied him to the crimes. No smoking gun, no confession, just shadows. Profiles and possibilities. The FBI built a profile. They believed the killer was likely a white male, aged 25 to 40 at the time. Someone with local knowledge of neighborhoods, roads, and police procedures. Possibly employed in a job offering mobility and trust, like delivery work, repair services, or public safety. Likely charming or harmless in appearance. Someone children might not immediately fear. Possibly organized, with signs of ritual or control. But even that was theory. Imagination stretched to fill gaps in the dark. Over time, the case grew quieter. People moved, homes changed hands, the neighborhoods rebuilt. The murders faded into eerie local legend, a strange story whispered in schoolyards or murmured across coffee shop counters when the news ran dry. But for some, the alphabet never stopped repeating itself. Loose threads and lingering questions. Why the initials? Why the matching towns? Was it truly intentional, or just strange coincidence? Why did the killings stop? Did the murderer die, move away, or simply decide they were done? And why those girls, in those places, at those times? The questions are gentle now, tired, like leaves caught in a breeze that never settles. And through it all, the families remember. There are still birthday cards never opened, bedrooms left untouched for years, the faint echo of laughter through time. And in dusty police archives, folders sit thick with paper, eyewitness sketches, handwritten notes, maps drawn in pencil, all waiting, silently, for a connection that may never come. The alphabet murders remain officially unsolved, but their mystery and their memory still linger. In the final part of our story, we'll reflect on that memory, on legacy, media, and the quiet ways these stories shape our world. But for now, rest. We're almost home. When a mystery remains unsolved, it becomes something else entirely. It becomes folklore. It becomes a mirror. It becomes a story we tell, not just to remember what happened, but to understand what it means. And so it is with the alphabet murders. The stories we carry. 3 girls, 3 names, 3 towns, all linked not just by tragedy, but by the echo they left behind. For some, these stories are haunting. For others, they are sad. And for a small few, they become obsessions, puzzles to solve, patterns to decode. But for those who knew them, for the families, the classmates, the neighbors, these are not stories. They are holes, gaps in the world where someone should still be. Birthdays missed, graduations uncelebrated, the weight of a name never spoken aloud again. And even though decades have passed, the ache remains. Not loud, not sharp, but constant, like a distant hum beneath the silence of a room. What we still don't know. People often ask, how could the killer not be caught? How could someone plan something so eerie, so specific, and simply vanish? The truth is, the world was different then. No surveillance cameras on every corner, no digital trail, no DNA testing, no satellite tracking, no smartphones. Just footsteps, eyewitnesses, gut feelings, and sometimes that's not enough. Even now, with advances in technology, the case sits untouched. Files scanned, dusted, reviewed, but never resolved, and maybe it never will be. Why these stories stay with us. There's something deeply human in our desire to make sense of the senseless, to see order in chaos, to believe that for every crime there must be justice, that for every question there is, somewhere, an answer. But sometimes we don't get the answer. Sometimes all we get is the story. And stories, strangely enough, are their own kind of justice, their own kind of memorial, their own way of saying, we have not forgotten you. Not Carmen, not Wanda, not Michelle. A final breath. If you're still with me now, lying quietly in the dark, thank you. You've spent the last hour not just learning a case, but honoring 3 lives. You've listened with patience, with stillness, with care. And maybe tonight, as you drift off to sleep, you'll carry those names with you just a little longer. Let them settle in the soft corners of your dreams. Let them be remembered not just for how they were taken, but for how they live. And let that be enough, because sometimes remembrance is the only closure we get. Good night from Lullabies of Crime. Thank you for listening to this episode. If you found comfort or quiet in this story, consider joining us again soon. Each week, we walk slowly through another mystery with empathy, care, and calm. Until then, sleep softly and let the world be quiet around you. You are safe now. You are home. Good night.